trailblazer, pioneer, advocate, philanthropist. There are just so many words I could use to describe today's guest, but I think we would just run out of time. So instead, I'm just going to say welcome to the Governor General of Australia, Her Excellency Sam Mostyn. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much, Abby, for that very, very warm welcome. And you've known me for a lot longer than my time here as Governor General.
Yeah, so it's great to be chatting to you again as the Governor General. Your dad was in the army, so I guess you would have moved houses quite a lot, not kind of staying stationary at one place for a long time. And I mean, I've only lived in one place, one house in the same suburb, but like, I guess what was that experience just moving all the time, especially having three younger sisters?
It was incredibly formative, and I'm not sure I'd be in this job today or many of my other jobs if I hadn't had the start I did. So when we were, I guess, also being an oldest child, you're sort of sensible and looking after people, looking after a family. You're hoping I can take care of my sisters, and they would probably say that didn't happen as well as I think. But we were moving a lot when I was young. So by the time I got towards the end of primary school, we were back in Canberra where I'd been born, and most of our movement had stopped. So it was very much an early childhood spent moving between Canberra, then the US and Canada when I was very young, and then back to Australia and Melbourne, Adelaide, then back to Melbourne, and then finally back to Canberra. So I think I just got used to the idea of moving every couple of years. My mum was packing up the house, and I think I found out as I got older, particularly when I left home, my early adult life, I kept moving every couple of years too. So when I finished in Canberra, I spent a couple of years in Sydney, a couple of years in Melbourne, back in Sydney, then in Canberra, then to London and back. So my adult life seemed to be repeating what I'd learned to do when I was younger, which was being prepared to move for the job and not feeling like I had to stay in the one place. So I'm very comfortable moving, comfortable travelling, and I think that was all laid down very early by being at primary school, where I was leaving and meeting new people quite regularly until we were quite stable then in Canberra.
Yeah, so it does sound like, I guess you got quite used to that idea, but in terms of like, I'm all about asking about sport, and I know that you played a lot of sports, so did that kind of impact like when you took them up? Like, were you playing the same ones as you moved?
So I've been trying to remember more about that. I think I was playing sport wherever we were. We were certainly swimming. When my dad went to Vietnam when I was very young, and my mum moved us into her mother's house in Adelaide, she was always concerned. We lived quite near the beach, near Glenelg in Adelaide, and she was concerned that as effectively a single parent for a year, she wanted to take us to the beach, but she wanted us to be able to swim. So we did intensive swimming very young. So we all became swim safe, water safe. And so I remember early on that wherever you are, you can swim. You can always find a pool or go to the beach if you're near the coast. And so I remember swimming was something that I did wherever we were. And then playing team sports really started a little bit towards the end of primary school, certainly netball, and then into high school. By that stage, we were fairly settled in Canberra. So I played netball, basketball and tennis as a regular series of sports and kept swimming up a bit. And then by the time I got to university and discovered that that rowing was something I could do and enjoyed, sport was always there through everything. And I think sport travels with you, and you can if you're good at it and you understand a team dynamic. I particularly like team sports because of the friendships you build. It's competitive. And you get to travel a bit around your city and meet other schools or other teams. So moving around didn't stop us having a really great sporting life as kids.
Yeah, and I do know that a lot of the athletes that like I've interviewed have said that, oh, like their brothers got them into sport or their sisters did. So was that kind of a similar case for you? Like, were your sisters very sporty, I imagine?
Yeah,
maybe?
I think we all were. We were, and sometimes we used our sport for our ability to swim. So for good. So when I was a teenager, I used to go to my youngest sister's school where there were kids with very serious physical disabilities, and quite often they were doing aquatherapy. And so quite often in my school holidays, together with my other sisters, we'd go down and we'd be in the pool just with those beautiful young children who, when they were able to release their body into the water and be out of their wheelchairs without any weight-bearing loads, so to see their joy of just being in water and using our skills of being confident in water to be there just to support and make sure they were safe. That's a really strong memory for me of just being involved in aquatherapy very early on, long before we had NDIS or we knew what would be good for people who had any form of disability. I've got really strong memories of being in pools, or particularly pools in those schools, and feeling like sport was also something, or just sporting capacity was something you could use for others as well. But yeah, my sisters and I, wherever we were, we kind of led each other along. Sometimes we played in the same teams if our age didn't matter. And we always just had a lot of fun. And I mean, I think about my parents back then, the amount of time they got in a car to drive us, often in really cold weather for netball, and be freezing while we were playing, and taking us to swimming camps and all that stuff. And I think that's why I admire so much about their parenting, that it was everything we needed to do. They were always there. And sport is one of those things where you need your parents, I think, early on to be very supportive. Yeah.
So it does sound like your parents were obviously very great at, I guess, bringing you up, but also oldest of four daughters, you were probably a very good leader. And I do remember reading that you were the captain of your primary school in Canberra.
Yeah.
So you were obviously like a leader from a very early age. But do you think that just came naturally to you, or maybe as the oldest daughter that kind of came to you?
Possibly, I think it's a bit of everything. And one of my sisters, I think I've said this on the record before, that one of my sisters said to me once, "Look, you were just born 30," which was a cheeky way of saying you're very serious, and where's the fun bit of you? And whether that was because we were a big family and I was the oldest, or whether I'm just naturally someone that behaves that way, I don't know. But we're a product of so many things. But so I was sensible, but I always was interested. I didn't think of myself as a leader. I don't think people who take on those roles actually think of themselves in those terms. I just always loved showing up. So when there were the competition or putting your name in the ring to be captains or on the school council in high school, I would just always show up and chance my hand and say, yep. And then you'd have to give a speech or have to talk about what you cared about. And I think from a fairly early age, I cared about how you could contribute to the future or how you could represent a group of people. And I learnt by the time I got to high school that representing girls at high school on a couple of issues really mattered, and we can talk about that later. But I became an advocate for some uniform changes and things that I thought were just wrong for girls at school that the boys had access to. So I think I just show up, and I think that you're a bit the same. I think a lot of the women I meet in sport who take their sport seriously and want to represent their school or their nation, they've been doing it a fair while and just show up and want to make a contribution.
Yeah, well, I think that's so important. And also what you mentioned about, I guess, even in high school, you were continuing to show those leadership qualities and try to, get uniform changes for girls so that they could wear, I think I read trousers like the boys as well.
You've done your research.
Yeah. So what even happened there? Was there kind of a movement there, or were your parents supporting you through that?
No, I don't remember my parents being involved very much. They were always supportive of, I think this is where my dad, being in the military, and you actually have a sense of contribution and standing up for the right things and having good values. I remember at high school, so by that stage in high school we were in Canberra. Winters were very, very cold. The boys always wore trousers, of course, and they wore shorts in summer. And throughout the year, the girls had a dress or skirt. And you might be able to wear stockings, but it was just freezing to be going to and from school in skirts. And so we asked if we could wear trousers, and for a long time the school said no, it was inappropriate for girls to wear trousers to school. So we're in that time, and there's remnants of that today where we make distinctions between the rights of girls and boys, or men and women. And so I just got a petition together with a group of the girls at school, and we lobbied, and we showed how disrespectful it was not to have choice. We also showed how unhealthy it was. We were freezing, and that we had long bus trips and walks to and from school. We went and found out what kind of trousers would be appropriate in a school colour. So we found that you could get a pair of blue cords that were in the same colour as the skirt, so we weren't going to look like we were in jeans. So we did the research, and we made this we had a petition, and we won because we left the school with no room to go, because it wasn't just about fashion, or we'd thought about it deeply, we'd made our case, we'd found a solution, and we'd indicated why it was important. And in the end, the school said, okay, that makes sense, and we all were able, if we wanted to, we could wear blue cords in winter. So a little victory early on, but it showed the power of you can change things, but you need to know why you're doing it, what you're asking for, and always best to have a solution rather than just complain about a problem.
Yeah, well, it's amazing that you got that done and I guess started all of that. But I did want to ask, because I've found out that you were very passionate about being a leader and I guess making or changing things. But I guess when you did go to uni and you were kind of starting jobs, I guess in the real world, if I could say that, were you finding it was still kind of maybe a bit easier to stand up for what you believed in, or did that make you just even more passionate, I guess, seeing all of those more just real world problems and trying to change this?
I worked part-time for many years from the time I was 13.
Wow.
Again, this is in the
Yeah.
last century. And we lived in a suburb where there was a local shop, the local shops, and there was a local chemist. And I was what was called a chemist shop girl. And back then there was no weekend trading other than Saturday morning. So if you get a job in the local chemist, work Friday night and Saturday morning, then you could fit in your sport as well, but get a little bit of money and learn how to have a basic job. So how to serve people, how to stack shelves, how to work out the change, all that kind of stuff. And so I started that when I was 13, but my real world experience of being a full-time employee started midway through my law degree, when I went from being a full-time student to part-time, and I worked full-time in the ACT Magistrates Court as a researcher. And the court was located right on the campus at ANU, so I could balance the two. I think what I learned, because I was also working in the court system,
Yeah.
about justice and fairness, I learned about the real world of what does happen once you're out there and have to use your skills and show up for work. You can't not turn up. You have to actually do the work you're asked to do. So I think I just learnt the responsibility of work, and then I learnt how to be curious in your job, as to, if you want to push out a bit and grow and get skills, how to ask for more responsibility. I also learnt that change is hard once you're in a system. Easier at school to work with a group of girls to change the uniform code, but when you're seeing things that are unjust or want to change, then as a full-time person with adults, you've got to think much more about the world you're in. Why do you want to change something?
Yeah.
Does it really represent what everyone else wants to do? And so I learned that, and because I was working in a court system, I went from that job to work as an associate to Justice Michael Kirby, who taught me, I think for the first time, he was my first boss who was all about human rights, justice, not just as a judge, but he had this view about compassion for everybody in a community, wherever they were. And I watched him be a different kind of judge to many that I'd studied at law school. And he taught me the incredible role of love, and talking about love and compassion, even in the hard world of the law. And he also taught me about showing up and working hard, and showing, if you cared for something, stick with your values and do show up. And so I started to pick up guides and people who by that stage were very inspiring for me. So Michael Kirby was a very big inspiration once I was an adult, and to see what it takes to have an influence on a society.
Yeah, well, I guess I wanted to ask a bit more about that, because it feels like a lot of the roles that you've had in like big companies and organizations have been about things that you really care about, or things that you're really passionate about, like gender equality, climate change, even later being on the AFL Commission, being on the board of that. So, like, I guess, why is it so important for you to use your skills, and I guess to be involved in all of those in just so many different ways, and in companies that you're really passionate about?
I think if like me, we've had the incredible fortune and privilege of working with people whose values determine what they did and how they changed a society or a workplace or stood up for things, it's very hard not to think, well, what's my responsibility in certain circumstances. And I kept finding myself in situations, either in big companies where there was when I was joining those big corporates, there was a debate about whether companies needed to have values and act in the public interest or just shareholders' interests. How did you balance the needs of customers with workers? And so it was a time when all the world was wrestling with what did it mean to be a good company or a good employer. And I found myself almost beginning to represent some of the values I'd seen growing up, and standing up for them inside an organisation. And by the time I was in those companies like Optus or NRMA and IAG, I felt I knew how to use my voice appropriately, how to show up in a governance or executive sense, and bring a perspective from those who are often not at the top table or not in the roles where they've got a voice. So I often found myself in roles where I felt I was speaking on behalf of a number of people. I could see what they were going through. I could see our processes that were poor, or values that were not being adhered to, bullying that was going on. And if you're a senior and you bullied someone, there was no accountability. And those things really bothered me, that you could get to be senior or have more power in an organisation, which would protect you from taking accountability or responsibility for your actions. So that's where I started sitting around those executive tables and asking questions like, do we really understand who we're doing this for? Has anyone spoken to our employees? Do we really talk to our customers? If we're going to make profit over here, do we know at whose expense? And so I was very, very fortunate to be doing that at a time when it was just starting to be something that companies and big organisations were thinking about. And for me, it particularly became about why there were no women at the table. Why were there no people with diverse cultural
Yeah.
backgrounds? Why was it just a group of men who were always at the top of an organisation, often had no cultural diversity, often they'd gone to the same schools and backgrounds. And all those things, I felt like if you get into the room, it's not just about achieving that. It's about then doing something with that incredible capacity to speak on behalf of others and try to fix those inequities.
Yeah, well, it's amazing. And that's why I guess I wanted to ask you more about, and now in 2005, becoming the first woman to be join the AFL Commission, which, like you mentioned before, you need more people, more of a diverse background, and also
Yes.
having more women, which is so important. But I imagine, I wasn't around then, but I imagine it was just a massive thing to finally have a woman just in such a male-dominated,
Yeah.
I guess, industry. So if you could just talk a bit about like what that was like, but also if you had just any doubts going in at first, I guess like being the first woman, like how was it?
Yeah, look, it's a very big part of my story, and I think it's interesting that it is sport, and that and when it happened. So I was 30 when I was in my going into my sort of early 30s when this was all happening. Very, very lucky that the sport I liked to watch. I wasn't mad about. I'd never played it, but I was a fan through my dad's interest in footy. I was lucky that a chairman of the league, quite unbeknownst to me at that time, was sitting thinking about the same things I'd been thinking about in the corporate world. He was
Wow.
thinking about it in relation to sport and AFL, and he was saying to the commissions, this was Ron Evans, and he was chairman of the commission at the time, and he was looking around saying, if half the members of clubs and the people who allow the boys to go on and play are the mothers, and most of the memberships and the merchandise is bought by women for this game, why is it we have no women around the decision-making tables of the AFL? And he kept asking that question, and most of the game and people in the game had thought, well, it'll happen naturally one day. We'll get a woman into the clubs or into the AFL, and it just wasn't happening. So he worked with a number of the clubs. Not all of them at the time agreed, but the majority, 13 of the then 16 clubs, agreed that there would be a special process to appoint a woman to the commission, but it would be done by a headhunting firm, and they were going to seek the nominations of 10 women around the country. So I was approached as to whether I put my hat in the ring to be considered, and we had 10 of us that were interviewed, and then finally got down to 4, 2, and then I was the lucky woman left standing that was
Wow.
appointed. So it was a big process. It was all merit-based, and I was appointed in, I think it was July of 2005. I will never regret doing it. It changed everything in my life about showing up in sport and in the biggest sport in the country and one of the most heavily dominated by men in governance. And I'll never regret doing it, but it was very hard. And this was long before social media. I received a lot of pushback from men in the game. A lot of very angry men said that this was the beginning of the end of Australian rules
Oh,
football,
wow.
that it would be soft, that when women come in, they destroy everything. I was criticised as being a gender quota, that I had no merit, and that if it was meritorious, it should have just come, women should have been compared to men. The arguments went on and on. It was angry and nasty. I got letters that were written by men, you could tell from the writing, they were so angry and so mean. I received horrible packages of revolting stuff sent to me. And it was all because we were, Ron, working with good leaders, good men, was trying to say, we have to break the back of this and have women in the governance of the game. And so I'm forever grateful to Ron and the team of men that employed me and that appointed me. And I asked when I was appointed that I not be the last. I said, I'm very honoured to be the first. I don't want to be the last or the only. So the next few appointments I'd like to see being gender equal. And by the time I left the Commission, about 11 years later, 4 members of the Commission were women, and that continues to this day. And now includes women who have Aboriginal background. And so it was hard. If I'd taken it personally, I don't know whether I would have kept showing up, because it was persistent. There were newspaper articles written about this that were not pleasant, and I figured I've got here, just like I'd always had thought, stick with your values. Who are you here for? I was there for women, but I was also there for the good of the game. And so I kept saying to people, I'm not here just representing women. I'm representing anyone
Exactly.
who expects good governance of the game, and I'm as interested in the rules of the game, how we pay players, how we deal with concussion, accepting of the rules, as I am with gender equality, because it was important to make sure that people knew that I was there as a full commissioner, not just representing the gender issues or women. But it was hard. But sometimes being the first, you've just got to get on with it, and always open the door behind you, and always lift up others to come along, and never behave in a way that stops progress. I think I knew at the time if I complained or made a big deal of it, some could have said, well, this is what happens when women come. They're needy, they're not able to cope, and that would set in train a problem for future women or people of different backgrounds to be given a chance. So if you're a pioneer, your job is to do the job incredibly well, often hold inside any of the sense of disappointment or anger you have, and just show what's possible, and always know that everyone who comes next has got to be given a chance and a pathway, and that's part of the job of a pioneer in this kind of field, particularly in sport.
Yeah, and I guess, like you said, you weren't just there to be a woman, just to have a woman there, but it was still very amazing that you were able to pave the way for women after that.
And only in governance. I mean, women had been involved in the sport, as you know. Women had been playing the game. They had been involved in the local leagues, in the state leagues. I had been approached by so many women once I started who were the absolute pioneers of what ended up being AFLW. I just became part of that story because I was in a position of authority and agency on the commission to do my part of it. But the women I met, the players, the volunteers that had been in football all their life, they're the people, by that stage of my career, they inspired me. It was, Debbie Lee, Jan Cooper, all the women who ended up playing in the first few rounds, first few years of competition. And there were administrators and board members, and they were everywhere. Susan Alberti, who'd been quietly funding huge amounts of money at the Bulldogs, Western Bulldogs in Melbourne, to actually get girls travel allowances to get to games. So there were incredible people around. I just joined, I think, a chorus and had to play my role.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm kind of getting to, I guess, the end now, so I've got a couple more things I wanted to ask you. So one of them is just, like, what is leadership as a whole? Like, what does it mean to you?
I think it's such a big and general question, but I think leadership is all about values. So I've always lived by a set of values about decency and honesty and integrity, being totally transparent about who I am, but always about care and kindness and respect for everybody. And sometimes people have thought that's the soft end, but actually caring for people, showing respect, being kind as a leader is sometimes the bit that gets chopped off when leaders think they've got to be tough, uncompromising. And I think the greatest leaders I've ever worked with have had a combination of absolute determination and clarity around what they've got to achieve, but they do it in a way that brings people with them, keeps an eye out for people who are left out. And often the best leaders I think of those at the table say, but who's not here that we should be considering? Who am I not really able to represent, and whose voices should be here? And so leadership for me is you take on a responsibility to lead, and therefore that responsibility must be met by your own behaviour, supported by consistent values, caring about why you're doing it. It should never be about ego or about a claim or doing it for anything other than to get the job done and to make sure everyone feels included in what it is you're doing and feels that that's been done with an act of care and respect. I think one of the greatest features that great leaders have is curiosity, and never believing that you understand everything yourself. So curiosity and not self-doubt, doubt. So if you don't know something, it's okay to be doubtful and to go and seek the evidence or ask to meet the people who do know.
Yeah.
Leaders don't need to be the smartest person in the room. In fact, they very rarely are the smartest. They're generally someone who can bring the smart people together and celebrate their contribution. And that's what I think about a lot. That I'm always impressed by leaders where you can see they don't know the answer to everything, and they've got enough courage and humility and vulnerability to say, I don't know the answer to this, but we're going to find out. We're going to work together. And so curiosity, humility, a sense of purpose, sticking to your values, and compassion and kindness. That's what I think about when I think about great leaders. And generally, when those things are happening, things get done and leave a legacy for others well beyond the ambition of the person personally.
Yeah, I think that's great advice as well, but they're definitely great values. And the last thing I wanted to ask is just going back to sport is, what has sport given you just across your whole life? What has it given you?
It's such a great question, Abby. For me, sport has been liberating. As a girl, I was playing as much sport as any of the boys. Probably not the same sports, but I was using my body. I was learning how to play in a team. I think you often see a line between those who function really well as leaders in their careers and the fact they played team sports. Because in a team sport early on, you've got to be generous, You've got to work out where you fit in the team. You've got to share the load. If you are the person that doesn't play as well or can't compete as hard, you're relying on someone else, and you'll do that the same for someone else in a team. So team dynamics, learning about what it means to be a member of a team or to lead a team, being physically fit and active. Sport lets you travel, lets you experience different environments. It tests you. You've got to set, I think the best athletes always say that they set goals and then they try to meet those goals, whether it's a fitness goal or a running distance goal or a laps in the pool goal, whatever it is. Goal setting and saying I'm going to achieve that and prove to myself that I can set a goal and meet it. But a lot of the time, sport has just been fun. So playing sport for me was always fun, and using my body and enjoying the team and having a sense of, great. When you win, nothing like that moment of a win. And when you lose, learning how to lose well as well, learning how to win well and lose well. For me, they've always been life lessons. And then now, as someone who I don't play as much sport, but I watch a lot of sport and I've governed a lot of sport, I just love what sport brings out, whether it's watching our cricketers, our wonderful Australian women cricketers, how they play, how they go about their business, how they represent the values of the country, as well as being great cricketers. The Matildas changing the world through sport, our women, our AFLW players, our netballers, and then for me, I can get a lot of joy out of watching the men's sports as well. So, I still love AFLM and going and watching my teams play in footy. But sport to me shows us a side of ourselves, particularly as Australians, that I think says so much about our character, a bit of our larrikin streak, a bit of our competitive streak, doing things together, celebrating and dealing with our victory as well as you deal with defeat. And I get a thrill at anything I'm attending that's sport. And if I'm always happiest, actually, I think, closest to a sporting event. Yeah. But, tell me about why sport matters to you so much so early.
Yeah, well, I think I agree with a lot of what you said, and especially it's a way for people to feel like they belong. And a lot of the people that I've interviewed as well have said, especially athletes in para sports that have maybe been looked down on or not as included in their lives. I think it's a way for them to belong. So it's important for me to promote them so that they are making sure that they have something that they can go to and that they can do. But also, I think playing sport, it's so important. Like you said, that's when you feel the happiest or when you win a game or whatever. So I definitely play a lot of sport myself, but definitely agree with all of what you've said.
It's good that you talk about belonging, because it is one of those rare parts of our community where everyone can belong. Yeah. And that's why I think leaders of sport have had to work really persistently and carefully to make sure that all sports do open up and don't remain narrow. Para sports have been incredibly important, and then there are sports that welcome people who came from migrant or refugee backgrounds and welcomed into this country through the power of sport, a community, families coming together who might not have good English, suddenly through sport find a pathway for understanding the Australian culture. I saw the Afghan women's cricket team play for the first time, having fled Kabul, and to be welcomed into the cricket family in Australia, and to see all of them playing down at the Junction Oval in Melbourne, alongside the Test series that was going on, the Ashes, and to see the families. I always look back to the stands quite often about what's happening with people who are there, and to see all those families that had come from Afghanistan looking around and saying, we belong here. This place, Australia, welcomes us, and our girls are playing in a sport that Australia has always loved. Everyone belonged on that day. So I think belonging is a big part of what we should hope for sport, and we see at our very best.
Thank you so much for the interview. It was so great to...
always great to see you, Abby, and I'm sure I'll see you somewhere very soon, beside an oval or at a stadium.
Probably.
And there's lots of sport ahead, so we've got a big year ahead for women's and girls' sports.